Okay, this next project I have been excited about for a little while, and this is it. All right, do you see that? That looks a lot like the old Gunne Sax type things, with all of the lace insets and pin tucks and everything, which is right up my alley. And this is a new Simplicity pattern, just, right now. It's a late spring pattern, number 9542, and I'm excited about it. I'm going to be doing this version, I'm going to be making it actually fairly long. I like that look. And there's an option of doing it either without all the lace or with, but with. And I'm going to show you, I have this fabric that is 100% linen, and I have pre-washed it. And it is like this sage green color with little chamomile looking flowers on it. So, see if you can see right there. Isn't that pretty? So I think that that is going to work really well for this type of a thing here. And, I have a boatload of lace to play with too, so very excited. Anyhow, I'm going to get started laying out and cutting this. We'll take it a step at a time. All right, so I have my pattern pieces cut out of the tissue paper, not of the fabric yet. And I want to look at this drawing here. Now, I'm going long, but my legs are shorter than their standard size, I suppose. And so if I leave it the way that it is coming out of the package, it's floor length on me, which is a little too long. So I'm going to want to shorten it, probably at least 3 inches in the tissue paper, and then I'll have a generous hem, so that should be fine. But here's the thing. On the pattern piece itself, it does not have like a lengthen and shorten here type of thing. And I don't want to take any from this part because we have these really long pleats coming down, and then we have lace inset. And so if I shorten this part too much, I'll have that cut out lace inset way too high for my comfort level. So then I have all of these places where there's going to be lace and getting to the bottom. And so I've decided just to take it off the bottom because there's a decent amount of length here. What do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inches here. So if I go ahead and cut 3 inches off, I still have enough for a generous hem and then a couple inches before my lace kicks in. But I just wanted you to be aware, if you're going to be shortening it, to watch out for the lace placement. And if you're going to shorten it, do it now. I put a little tape mark on my ruler so it's easy for me to see, and I'm just going to make lines at that 3-inch point all the way across and connect it, because the hem is on a curve, so you can't just cut straight across at 3 inches. Okay, so I have the pieces all cut out. Now my fabric actually has a nap. There's like a pattern on here where all the stems of the flowers are pointing up. So I had to make sure that I laid everything in that one direction. So my flowers would always be going up and not down. That's important to me. And there's a lot of stuff to mark on this front piece. This is where we're going to get started. So what I need to do is punch out these little circles. And I use my little tool. It's just the easiest thing for me. It punches the circles right out, and then I come back, and I am using red to mark this because it's going to stand out. This is a heat erasable pen. Now when I'm marking my notches, I do just clip them, but this is a Simplicity pattern, and their notches are large. So I'm not going all the way to the top of it. I'm just going about halfway, and that way it gives me enough of a notch that I can find it, but not so much that it might cause trouble later. Okay, so I want to show you how I have my markings done. On the wrong side, I have my dart markings on here. I've put my dots and I've connected them with lines. Now I'm going to be marking for my pin tucks, or they're actually like 1/4-inch pleats. They're wider than a pin tuck, what I would consider a pin tuck. But anyway, I'm going to be marking these on the right side. Now they have lines here. There's 3 different little pleats, and they have the lines that are going to come together and meet. Now this is a 1/2 inch between each one, all right? So basically it's a 1/4 inch pleat by the time you have them folded together. So for me, it is easier for me while I am sewing to be able to line up the edge, and I'll show you as I sew it. But instead of putting these side marks, I'm actually going to draw one center mark at the center of each of these tucks on both the top and the bottom. So I'll end up with just 3 lines on here. Okay, and now I'm going to put my ancient yardstick on here and connect those. And this is going to be the very edge of my pleat, which will be a lot easier and faster for me to deal with than trying to match up the 2 side pieces. Okay, so that's how I'm marking it. So the tucks on the front and only marking the centers, and the darts I'm marking on the back. So okay, so this is how I work with my lines I drew for my pin tucks. I'll pinch it so that that line is on the top, and that is basically my edge. And since these are 1/4 inch, I know that the side of my presser foot is a 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to place it so that the edge of my presser foot is right up against my the fold line, and run it straight down. And to me, this is a lot easier than having to match up the actual stitching line. Okay. So then I have my dart. Now we're going to be pressing these over to one side and basting them before I serge around the edge or anything. And when I do that, all of my marks are going to disappear because it is a heat erasable pen. Alright, so now we have the tucks done, and I need to pin up for this dart. Now I'm not serging around the edge of this until after I have this dart sewn. So the first thing I'm doing is putting it together and sticking a pin through that first dot, folding it in half to this last dot here. I just stick a little pin through it so I have an ending point, you might say, making sure everything's going to line up. Tuck that in, and then tuck another one in about halfway. And I always start my stitches down here at the bottom and work up to the point. Yes, I do backstitch, but I'm very careful to stay exactly in the same stitch track. Alright, so now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to serge over the edge of this clipped dart right here, and also basically I'm going to serge all the way around except this neckline, because there's going to be a facing over that, and I don't want any extra bulk there, and I'm not worried about that fraying before I get the facing on. My fabric is fairly thick. This would be really nice on just a calico or something like that too. And as I'm pressing it, all those lines that I drew to mark my tucks, they're disappearing. So I'm going to come back inside just to make sure I have it nice and flat here. And I am working on 100% linen, so it can take a lot of high heat. This dart here is going to be pressed down, and you can see where down is because this is the little sleeve part here that's sticking out. So at this curve in your ironing board here, if you're using a standard ironing board, that's kind of a nice place to press these. All right, so there we go. So now we have a basic front piece with the dart and the tucks. Now the next part is to start adding lace, which is exciting. All right, so the pattern, this is the back piece. I've serged, you know, from the shoulders down and back around. It wants you to stay stitched around this neck edge. We need to keep this neck from stretching out of shape. And instead of stay stitching, I'm using my woven fusible stay tape, this stuff. And what this is, it's just gonna keep it from wanting to stretch. Okay, so this is the back piece, and I am pinning the front shoulder pieces together to the back shoulder pieces. And I'm going to be sewing these on here at a 5/8 inch seam allowance straight across here and here. So for attaching this lace, the first thing I did is came down and measured 5/8 of an inch all the way down and put several marks all the way down this strip. So I had a guide I can go by. Now the lace that I'm using, if I was to lay it straight on there, it's actually a little wide, so it was kind of encroaching into the pleat area. So what I'm actually doing is I am folding the edge under so that it's slightly narrower. And I'm just going to press that under really quick. And this is cotton lace, so it's easy to do. If you have nylon lace or polyester lace, just be a little bit careful, but it still works. So then I can just lay it down with my new edge against those marks I put at the 5/8 inch point and pin it on, and then go to my little singer and sew that on. So the next step is to start attaching lace, and I can see that I'm going to be switching back and forth from green thread to white thread and green thread to white thread, and I decided that, you know what, I'm just going to set up another machine with white thread so that I can just switch back and forth. So this is another old family machine. This sweet old girl was made in Great Britain, it says up here. So I'm going to go ahead and put white thread on her, and the lace that we're putting on right now is going straight down the front. We're placing it in 5/8 inch, so you make sure you measure 5/8 inch in, and that's where you're going to put the edge of your lace. And I am going to sew it down both sides. Oh yeah, that's nice. The next step is to put lace at the shoulders, and so this is the shoulder seam here, and it's on the front part. So at the top where that seam is, I'm going to be putting the edge of this piece of lace, and I'm going to be doing that for both sides. What really makes lace a lot easier to deal with is if you starch it first. So I'm going to take these two pieces over to my ironing board, iron them with a good coat of starch, and that's going to give them enough body that when I go to work around these curves, they're gonna behave a lot better for me. All right, so I've starched them. You probably can't tell, but they do have more body now, and so that's going to make it better when I go to iron it. When I go to sew it on. So I'm actually laying this top edge here right along the seam line. Now make sure before you do this that your shoulder seams are pressed open and you've finished off those two edges. So whether you serge it or turn it under and stitch it or something, but do a nice edge on these seam allowances and press them open before you do this part. Okay, so that's our top so far. We've got lace on the shoulders, down the front, and the pin tucks. So now we actually need to put lace on the sleeves before we can attach it to that bodice. So this is the sleeve piece here. So actually before I start placing lace on here, I'm going to clip my notches, and there's a dot here at the center top that's going to indicate the shoulder seam. But I'm going to go ahead and serge around both pieces and then come back and I will mark this line here which is going to show where I'm going to be putting this wider lace. So if you can see here, that's the shoulder piece we just did. It's like a drop shoulder on this thing. And then there's a thinner lace up at the very top. And then lower down, there's a wider one. And on the sleeve, we're actually going to do some cut work with that wider lace, which should be nice. All right, so I have the sleeve serged. So what I need to do is, again, mark where 5/8 falls all the way across the very top edge, because we're going to be placing our narrower lace just on the sleeve side of that. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes and work across the top here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm not worried about running out of space this time, so I'm going to use this lace just as it is, except look at that, I need to iron it. So what I'm going to do is find the length that I need, which is right about here. I'm going to cut 2 of these and go over to my ironing board once again and iron these with some starch. So now you can see these are a lot firmer, you know, than they were before. They're not like paper or cardboard stiff, but they definitely have the body that you need when you're going to be sewing around them. All right, so on the pattern piece, there we go. There's a line down here for lace placement, and I have drawn that with my heat erasable pen, and I have I have starched some more lace, and this is the wider lace that I'm going to be putting here. Now this lace, I'm going to sew it on just the same, sewing it across the bottom and again across the top. Okay, so there are very light stitch lines right here where you can very faintly see the stitching I did. Now on this side, the very bottom edge of this is loose. There's a very faint kind of track where I followed it straight across on this bottom edge because that looked like a fairly straight path. Okay. All right, so you can probably see I have one straight line and one dotted line. I just did not feel like cutting the other one straight for some reason. Don't know why, but what I'm going to do now is go ahead and carefully, so I don't cut my lace underneath, I'm going to be cutting down these lines, just cutting the fabric. Okay, so I've cut that strip out. Now what I need to do is go to the ironing board and press both of these so they are out like this. So now I have these pressed open on this side, and I'm going to come back and redo another straight stitch just over where I did the first one, and that's just going to reinforce that, and then I'll be able to come back and use my applique scissors to trim off the extra. So I'm going to go do that really quick. All right, so this is it pressed open, and I need to trim this excess off. You can see I have my second row of stitching in there. Maybe you can't, but just trust me. There's another row of stitching that I just did over that. So I'm going to be using my applique scissors. These are really cool. They have a bend here and the top. Now, there's a little controversy on whether you cut it this way or this way. I use it this way. I use it with the half moon on top. And I can use it flat. And what you do is just come up next to your stitching and you can cut it flat, and it is going to cut up to but not including that stitching. And so you can get a really nice even trim that way. So for long strips like this, what I do is I put it near the edge of the table because that way I can use that bend. And like I said, there's controversy. There's a lot of people who, swear by doing it this way. It's a potato thing for me. So anyhow, I'm just going to come along and trim it completely sideways. And you can see it's just going to really trim right up to that line of stitching. Really cool. So that's what they're for. If you ever see them around, these are 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞. They've been around for many, many, many decades, and they still keep going strong. So anyhow, let me finish this up, and then we're going to sew the sleeves onto the bodice. Okay, so we are going to be just putting our sleeve face down and, matching up the edges, the notch, that center point that I told you, that matches up with the shoulder seam. And the one thing that you're going to need to remember when you're stitching this is, do you see, well, it's yellow, so you might not be able to see it very well, but my line of stitching here that is holding this lace on, you're going to hopefully have that placed just outside of 5/8, so that when you come to stitch it, your line of stitching will be just inside the seam allowance from that point, so you won't be going over it at all. So anyhow, get your everything pinned up, lined up, and stitched just so you don't touch that lace, but just on the inside of it. Alrighty, so this has been sewn on, and I have pressed the seam allowance towards the sleeve, and then going ahead and pinned the sleeve bottom and side seam together on both sides, and I'm going to stitch this up and over at 5/8 inch, just stitching all the way over the lace. And then when you come in here, I would do another pass so you have 2 layers of stitching in that curve, and then we're going to clip a few points just to get it there. Now this is a very, very thick spot. I've got several layers of linen, a few layers or a couple layers of really thick cotton lace there, so that's a big chunk. So I want to show you a good way to go over that. Alright, so I am just going to be sewing this seam here. When you're sewing along, make sure everything when you get close to your lace is laying the way you want it to. I'm just going straight over the lace. Yeah, when you get close to the curve, if you have a lot of bulk right here, and I do, this is like, oh, it's at least 1/8 of an inch tall right there. My machine's really powerful and I can slam over it, but if you have a problem, like when you're sewing over a really thick part, you might want to look at getting one of these little guys. It's called a point turner, but it has these little notches. One side is thicker than the other. You can see this is kind of dirty. I've had it forever. But what you do is, like, say I'm getting close here, and your machine usually gives you trouble when you go over ledges, like it'll skip stitches or something if you do. You just put this under your presser foot, and that way when you sew, you're just staying at the same level all the way across. Well, here, I'll just go ahead and go. And that way you don't have that problem with your presser foot going at an angle or something like that. So then I can, like, put this on this side of it until my foot is off, and then I can keep going. So that's just an option if you have trouble going over a really thick part, like when you're sewing denim or something like that, or a really thick twill or duck or something like that. So anyway, when you get one stretch of stitching all the way done, go back and re-stitch that underarm curve just one more time, just to make sure that it's gonna stay nice and secure. So I'm going to come back up here just before my curve, drop it, and I'm running another set of stitching just inside of it. So there you go. So what I need to do actually is trim off that extra lace that I don't need. But in this curve, I'm going to make a few notches, and it's to take the pressure out. Now this, I have a lot of extra there, so I'm just going to pull a little bit of that corner out because I don't need that bulk right there, and trim it. Okay, so that way this corner can open up and it's not going to bind on me. Alrighty, so right now I have a sleeve on my sleeve roll here, and I am just from that arm curve down, I am pressing it open because we need to press the hem on. So what I'm going to be doing is they want a narrow hem. So I am going to assume if I fold it up about 1/2 inch, press that, and then tuck it in, I'll end up with a really nice little narrow hem. So what I'm doing here is, this sleeve is plenty big to put over your sleeve roll, even if you make it as fat as mine is here. So I am just doing the first pass. Okay. And now I'm going to come back and just tuck that little raw edge down. Just kind of finger press it, and I'm going to give it a quickie little press there too. And I think that that's going to give a really nice hem, and I'm just going to straight stitch over that on my sewing machine. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to be working on is the neck facing, and I do need to interface it. And the stuff I'm going to be using, the linen that I'm using is fairly substantial. You know, it's not really lightweight, but it's a medium linen. So I'm going to be using a medium-ish weight interfacing to go along with it. But because of that, I want to make sure that I take out the extra bulk. And the pattern, of course, does not tell you to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. But what I'm doing is I want to take some of the bulk out from the inside edge, and the outside edge I'm not as concerned about. It's just the inside edge. So I'm going to be taking 1/2 inch off, and basically I am making a separate pattern just to cut my interfacing. So I set my seam gauge at the amount that I want to reduce it by. So in this case it is 1/2 inch. And this is wax paper. I think I mentioned that, so that's why it works. And I'm going to take this seam off. Basically everywhere that there is a seam or inside the neckline. So if you can see the wax paper, that's my new pattern for my interfacing. So it comes all the way to the edge, but I have cut 1/2 inch from in here. Okay, so that's still going to give me 1/8 inch to sew over, but I have all of this bulk taken out, and that's going to help it be a lot more supple around your neck. Okay, in the back I have it all the way up to the fold line, but I've taken out that 1/2 inch in here and at this seam line. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut out my interfacing. So I'm going to go ahead and fuse on my interfacing. And as always, I'm going to show you the way I do it. The first thing I do is press my fabric. Let me scoot this over here. Press my fabric so it is nice and flat and wrinkle free. Okay. My iron is out of water, so I'm going to add a little more water to it because I like to have a lot of steam when I am pressing my interfacing. Okay. Alrighty, let's add a little moisture to it now. There goes the steam. Alright, so now that I have that, I'm going to take my interfacing piece, which, if everything goes right, should line up along the bottom edge and give me about 1/2 inch at the sides. So now what I'm going to do is just press straight down and hold. Okay, and then do it the next spot. You don't move your iron around. You just press down and hold. So that will melt the little dots, and then I flip it back over, and on the right side I also iron it. And that way, if there's any spot that I've missed or any bubble that wants to develop or anything like that, I can take care of it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and fuse the two front pieces, those L shapes, in the same way. So I have pinned the facing pieces together up at the top shoulder area, and I'm going to go ahead and sew those at 5/8 of an inch and press the seam allowances open. Okay, so they are sewn and pressed open, and now along the outside edge all the way around I'm going to run a pretty nice tight serged edge just to hold it all in place and finish it off really nicely. Okay, so at this point we are ready to start pinning the facing on. Matching edges, matching corners, matching shoulders, matching center back. Get it, just set on there really nicely. And then after that, we're going to come back and sew at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you have a nice defined corner and work all the way around. Now I want to show you one thing, and it probably had to do with the pin tucks here, or small tucks I would call them better. When I got to my corner of my facing overshot the edge of my fabric by a little less than 1/4 inch. I am letting my facing dictate the neck size. So I'm just letting it overshoot it. When I come up to my shoulder, I am matching that shoulder seam just like I should. And then when I stitch, I'm going to be stitching 5/8 from this edge, from this facing edge. So then when I trim, I'll just trim a little bit extra off that front, and I'll still have 2 matching front neckline pieces. All right, so this is my seam, sewing my facing on. And what I'm going to be doing now is understitching it. So the facing, we're going to open this seam up. All of the seam allowance we're going to press towards the facing, okay? And then come back, and about 1/8 of an inch or so, just on this side, just on the facing side, going to run a row of straight stitches all the way around. Clip your corners at that front facing so that you can go ahead and to make this curve, and you should be able to get all the way around. If you need to stop and start a new seam when you get to your corner, that's fine, but you should be able to get all the way around. Again, make sure that you're stitching on the facing side. Okay, so this is the view from the right side. You can kind of see my understitching right along there, and that's just going to hold it so that when I turn it, it's going to have a really nice edge. Now that I have it's stitched down, before you trim anything, go ahead and make sure that all the way around it looks nice. And then I'm coming back inside here, and I'm going to trim up to that stitching. So like here is my front. I'm only going to leave maybe about 1/8 of an inch or so beyond that stitch, just so that it takes all that bulk out. So I'm going to go ahead and trim all the way around. So I just realized that I was reading this backwards. They wanted us to sew this facing on the opposite side, so that instead of folding it this way, so that it's on the inside like a normal facing, they wanted it so that you would fold it the opposite way and it would be on the outside like a band, like that. Okay, so right now I have a choice to make. I can either undo everything and re-sew it that way, or just leave it the way I have it, and I'm going to leave it the way I have it. But if you're going to be doing this pattern, just be aware that it's very similar to the way we did it, except instead of sewing it with the right sides together, you would actually be sewing it with the wrong sides together and flipping it over with this edge then being finished and sewed on, okay? And the actual dimensions of the dress and everything are going to be exactly the same. So I'm just going to leave it the way I have it here, because I don't want to, this linen, it frays. So I'm going to go ahead and press it, and I'm going to have my top button right over there. So it'll be the same height, okay? It's just not going to have a band across here. It'll just look like this at the top of the opening of the dress, and I think that's fine. All right, so this is my neckline, and I went ahead and I ran a row of stitching around at about 1 inch seam allowance. It'll give the impression and homage to a band, you know. Plus it'll hold this facing down, so my facing's not going to go anywhere now because it's got that row of stitching there. So just be aware when you see mine, it doesn't have an outside band, but the overall dimensions of this is exactly the same, so it will work. But I did do this row of stitching here just to give that effect. So onward now. Okay, good morning. So this is what we have right now, and actually it's looking kind of cute. Looks like a bolero jacket or something right now. And there's going to be a band that comes down the center here, so I'm not really worried about the fit. I think it's going to be fine. What we're going to do right now is go on to putting on, they call it the midriff, but it's like a waistband part, and then the skirt. And there's a lot of pleats in the skirt. Love pleats, so this will be good. All right, so this waistband is what they're calling midriff, and you cut 2 of them and 1 piece of interfacing, and I just left the interfacing whole because I'm only doing 1 layer. So I'm going to go ahead, fuse my interfacing to one of the pieces, and then come back and transfer all my markings and notches. My little pen ran out of ink, and I know a lot of people ask me about these things. I just get them, you know, they're generic. I get them on eBay. But if you do get them, get the refills, lots of refills, because you do go through them pretty quick. Well, at least I do. And they're not that much more expensive for the refills. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and mark everything, my center back especially. We've got dots and notches. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of that on my interfacing side. Alrighty, so I'm just going to take my single piece, the one that has the interfacing on it, and match it up. So this is my center back. I have a mark right there, so I can match that up. There shouldn't be any gathers or anything at this point. This should just lay nicely. Where those dots are, I actually draw a line connecting the dots, and that is the side seam. So I can match that up there. Make sure that when you're doing it, that your seam allowances stay open here. And it should line up with the edge. Mine's a little bit extra because I didn't serge it, but you know what? That's not a big deal. I wanted to show you, this is my back, and I do have a little bit of gapping here. What I'm going to do is just kind of split the difference with that and pin it in the middle. And when I sew this, I'm going to have this side up and this side by the feed dogs. And I'm just going to let the feed dogs ease that little extra in as I sew it. You know, you just hold it a little bit firmer, and the feed dogs work all that stuff in. So not a big deal if you have a little bit extra, just let it ease in on its own. All right, so I have it sewn on here. Now what I'm going to do is come back, and on the inside, I'm going to sew this one, okay? And it's same thing, 5/8 of an inch. Now the instructions say before you do it to fold this under and press it 5/8. I'm not going to do that. I will just fold it under at the time that I am going to whip stitch it. Okay, so I've got, this is on the good side, this is on the bad side. I just realized that my flowers are going the opposite way, but that's okay. You had to do it, lay it out that way. So anyhow, before I turn this and press it, I am going to come back and grade this so that I don't have one big chunk. Because you see all of these layers here, I want this to be able to fold over and press nicely, and I have kind of a little step right here where all of those layers come to an abrupt end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in the layer that has the interfacing. I'm going to take that down to about 1/4 inch, okay? Then the part that's attached to the bodice here, I'm just going to come back and cut down to just below all of that serging. and then that'll leave the top piece up here, and that'll just kind of gradually ease that transition down. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this all the rest of the way around. All right, so I've got it pressed down on both sides. So press it down on one side, then come back and also press it from the inside. That way you can make sure that everything is laying down as flat as possible. So yeah, I think that we're going to put this aside for right now and get started on the skirt. Now there is a lot of these really long pleats on the skirt, so I'm going to have to start marking those first. So there is a lot to mark on these skirts. So what I would suggest is that you get a nice flat table and just don't try to rush it. Set yourself down because you have to draw in a lot of darts, but also all of these placement lines for the lace. And the things with these placement lines is they're on a slight curve, so you can't just put a 1 and a 2 and draw a straight line. What I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to fold my pattern in half, matching up the ends of my lines up here. Okay, so I have a little fold line where I know the middle is. On this fold line, I'm going to punch holes in the pattern so that I can mark the beginning of the line, the middle, and the end. And then I can connect those in 2 different segments and get somewhat of that curve in there. And as you sew it, it's going to naturally even out. Okay, so I have my lines here for my lace placement marked on my front. Now the way that they do the darts, the pleats is actually more like a dart, where you have to match up the 2 dots and sew that seam. It's kind of like a dart but without a point. So because it's more like a dart and not like a traditional pleat, we mark those on the wrong side. So all of this stuff you're marking on the wrong side of the fabric. All of this stuff you mark on the right side of the fabric. And the way that I do this, here, flip this over. And the way that I mark my darts is I have my paper scooted down just a hair. And what I'm going to do is come up here on the top, draw some little lines where the ends of these are, so I can see that. Nice. Bring it up to where it should be. And then I'm going to fill in my circles that I punched. And so here's a line up here and a little dot down there. And I'm just going to connect them with a line. Okay, you see that? Now I'm going to do the other side of it. So then I have my 2 lines that I will be matching up to sew my dart. So I'm going to go ahead and do both of the front pieces just like this. Okay, so the way that I make my pleats, well, at least on this pattern, is you have your beginning point and ending point. So I'm going to stick a pin down in one dot at my beginning point and back up in the other side. All right, and just kind of tuck that in. And I'm going to do the same thing up here, about a 1/4 inch in. I'm going to put a pin down in one side and bring it back up about a 1/4 inch in on the other side. Okay, and tuck that one down. So now I have a rough idea here. Now to make sure that I'm not getting wonky in the middle, I'm going to pick a spot on one side, stick a pin, and make sure that where I'm coming out on the back side is also on a line. Okay, so with those 3 points down, if I want to, I can come back and put some others here just to make sure everything's good. But really with those 3 points, I should be able to go ahead and sew this. Now I am not going to press these until I have all 3 of them done on each side, because I don't want to erase my marks. So anyway, that's how I do it. So I have my 3 darts pinned together, and I'm going to go ahead and sew them. Now I start sewing up here at this edge, and I run it all the way down, get down to my dot, stop, and reinforce it, and then go to the next one. Okay, once they're sewn, all these pleats get pushed over so that they are aiming towards the center front and ironed. And this first pleat, the edge of it is going to come all the way over to the edge. I just double checked, and yep, that's how it's supposed to go. So at this point, what I'm going to do is just iron this top part. I am not going to let my iron get anywhere near that bottom. Now before I do too much else, what I'm going to do is, because I've got my pleats down and I've got them nicely pressed, the pattern says to go ahead and run a basting stitch across. Actually, I am going to serge all the way around these, and I'm just going to catch these pleats with my serger to make sure that they stay going the right direction, because as you can see, this stuff, it frays very easily, so I want to make sure I serge it right now before anything else wants to jump ship. Alrighty, so this is what we have so far. I have it kind of pinned in the front, and there is going to be a long placket that goes all the way down the front. And then I just kind of pinned these panels to my dress form so we can see. But I think it's going to be really nice. So at this point, what I need to do is do the back panels exactly like this, mark them all up. Alright, so this is my back piece, and I went ahead and serged around both pieces individually. I usually wait to do that until after I have my pleats and darts made, but I will probably be cutting off that serged edge on the very top when I go to grade the seam, so that's not a big deal to me. It was more important to me to have it so that I could press the center seam open with the serged edge on both sides, and to make sure that I don't have any fraying going on while I do my darts. So with that said, we have the same thing here where we're going to have all of these darts, and I just wanted to point out that I think the reason that they have you sew the center seam first is because this dart here is going to want to go all the way to that center point. And to me, looking at their diagram, let's see here, let me just match this up here. If I am going to make this exactly where they want it, I'm actually overshooting the center seam here. Okay, so having this, I'm just going to be overlapping them slightly. So that means that I'm actually going to have at this center back quite a few layers, because it's going to be something like that, but we can make it work. Alright, so I have all of my darts pinned together, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch them the same as for the front, starting on the outside edge and coming down to the point, reinforcing. And then after that, because I serged it already, I am going to be coming in, pressing all the darts towards the middle, let them fall where they may, and then I will be running a basting stitch across the top just to hold them securely so that they don't want to move from where they're supposed to. Alright, so took a break, got some lunch, and ready to start on pockets. So there's 4 pocket pieces, 2 for each side. I'm going to go ahead and clip my notches here, and go ahead and serge around all 4 pieces just so that they will be nice and finished, and then we'll get started putting them on the skirt. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is, even though I already clipped my notch, I'm actually going to draw over it with my pen just so it shows up a lot easier for me. And I'm going to mark my circles, my match point circles on each piece. So there's 2 on each one. Okay, so this is my side back, and you can see here's 2 little dots, and I put a pin mark where my notch is. And I am just going to match up my pocket piece over that, just like that. And I'm going to do that on both sides of the back. And actually, I'm going to do the same thing on both sides of the front. I'm just going to sew them all in one big step. So there's matching up 2 dots and 1 notch. Now, after you have them all pinned together, the seam allowance that you're going to be using is 3/8, so it's less than the normal stitch length or stitch width. And that's because if your seam allowance, say, is here for the pocket, so if your seam allowance is right there for the pocket, but for everything else it's up here, then that pocket seam is naturally going to be more set in and hidden, which is what we want. So I have the pocket sewn on, and I've pressed it out with the seam allowances going towards the pocket. Now what you need to do is come back and understitch this, which means running a row of straight stitches on the pocket side, on this side of the seam that we have here. So about 1/8 of an inch in, just running a straight stitch all the way down on all of the pocket pieces, and that's going to make it lay nice. Alright, so I've got my back piece face up on the bottom, my front face down, and I'm connecting the sides here. So I have made sure I have my little dots marked. If they disappeared, mark them again, because they're going to come in handy when you stitch. And I'm just lining up my edges here. Now, the seam allowance for stitching the pocket is 5/8. But I want to show you one thing. If you're like me and you like to serge around your pockets ahead of time, sometimes that slightly changes the shape of them, like here. See how one of my pockets is now a little bit larger on the outside? Well, instead of like purposely pushing it up and everything to make it fit, which I could do, but then I run the risk of having, you know, extra fullness in here. And to me, that is worse than having a pocket edge that nobody is going to see be slightly larger. So I'm just going to pin it as is, and when I sew it, I'll just make sure that I'm sewing within the smaller of the pockets, if that makes any sense. Now, when you're sewing this is all at the 5/8 inch seam allowance. That is a very hard thing to say, you know, 5/8 inch seam allowance. But anyhow, what I do is I always start at the top. Start at the top and come down to this first dot, okay, which should be on the skirt part of all of the other stitching that we've done. And then make a turn, cross over, come inside this pocket, go all the way around and back up here and aim to this dot, the lower dot. And again, that should be on the skirt side of all the stitching that we've done for the pocket. And then you can just come straight down at 5/8 inch the rest of the length, okay? And then the other thing is, when you are matching up your skirt down here, let me grab a few pins. Okay, because remember we have all of these marks down here for the lace. All right, and it looks like it's matching up well. I just want to double check when I'm pinning it that those marks are actually matched up, because that's going to make it a lot easier when I'm stitching if I don't need to adjust. Okay, so I have my pocket sewed together, and now what I need to do before I can press the seam open is make sure the pocket is laying towards the front, okay, and down below this dot I'm just going to clip into that seam allowance so that I can lay this flat and press that open. Now, in the directions, they have you also clipping it here and pressing it open in this little bit here. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let these couple inches here just be pressed towards the front. I don't see any harm in that. But from under the pocket down, I will be pressing that open. So I'm going to do that first. So actually, I nearly screwed it up. I forgot that all of this down here is marked with heat erasable pins. So I pressed the part way up by the pocket where there's no markings for our lace placement. And I am just going to finger press it open with my little ruler here on this bottom part, just to kind of hold it open. And then I'll do a final pressing on it after we have all of this lace in here. It's better just with my finger. I'll I'll do a final pressing after I have all of the lace on here. But if I go to iron this right now, my lines will disappear, which is not what I want. So at this point, I am getting ready to sew all the lace onto the skirt. But before I get started with that, I cut 3 lengths of lace, and I cut them longer than I think I need. I gave myself hopefully about 8 or 9 inches longer than what the dress calls for, because sometimes when you sew on lace, it takes it up a little bit. But I'm giving it a coat of starch just to give the lace a little bit more body. It was very soft so that it's easier to handle and to sew on. All right, so I'm just kind of placing this on here to get a feel for it. This is my very bottom, and I was planning on making a hem about like that. So I'm having some internal thoughts. They want, on the pattern, they want you to do the fat with the thin one right here. And that just does not look right to my eye. I am wanting instead to go something more like this with the thin one up on top. So I'm not too sure. I'm going to keep playing with it, but here's my thing. Okay, so here is how they have their lace. And you know what? I think at this point it's a design preference. So I am going to feel free to use lace in my own way, as long as I keep to a similar thing where it's, you know, horizontal lace with cut work in the wider ones. So I'll get back to you when I've made my final decision on how I'm going to lay my lace out. Alright, so what I have decided is that I am going to put my narrow one up on top, give myself a little space to show that it's purposeful, that it's a different style, and then do my 3 layers of my thicker one, or my wider one at the bottom. And that makes me feel better. Alright, so I've been thinking about the best way to do this. And I want to show you something else I've got in my little bag of tricks. And I'm going to be using it to base the lace on to hold it. And it is this. Let's see if we can get it. It's a Gutermann brand, and it is a fusible. Where's the words? Here you are. It is a fusible thread, okay? I don't put it in my needle, I put it in my bobbin. I have a special bobbin for this. And what I'm gonna do, I did it on this little test piece. I just run a straight stitch of it all the way down on both sides. Actually, on this one, I went down, across, and then back up. And then I iron it. And what it's going to do is this fusible thread is going to hold it enough that I can then manipulate it in there. You know, it's strong enough, it's not going to pull off while I'm getting it sewn on. Now, is this strong enough to hold it permanently? Oh my goodness, no, not at all. I mean, I can tear it and it'll come off, okay? But it's strong enough to hold it for what I need. So with that in mind, what I'm going to be doing is on my sewing machine, running along the straight path here, all the way down, just a straight stitch of this. On the wider pieces, I will be going down on both sides. But I think on this narrow one, just one length of it is going to be fine. And I think that by doing that, what I can do is at my ironing board, place it very carefully and iron it into place so that then when I go to my little Singer sewing machine, I'm able to make it work a whole lot easier. All right, so I'm just going to show you how I'm doing this. I'm lining up my line with the bottom edge of my lace, and I'm just basically doing one iron width at a time. And I use a hot steam iron hold it on for about 8 to 10 seconds. Okay, and that's enough to fuse it. So I actually, when I stitched this one, I used a little narrow zigzag stitch, and I think that that disguises the thread a lot more than a straight stitch, because it gives it a chance to kind of wrap around the lace parts. So, oops, that wasn't quite long enough. So I think it's going to work pretty well. Now, if you do this when you're you've done your zigzag and you're about to pull it off your sewing machine, what I do before I even pull it off, I put a pin on the right side. That way it's easy for me to tell which side is the right side with the regular thread and which side is the fusible. If it was going to be any more time than just literally picking it up from my machine and bringing it over here, I'd probably write on it with my heat erasable pen. Okay, I want you to see what we have right now. I've just pinned the skirt onto the dress form. And that's the lace down there at the bottom. I don't have it hemmed or anything, and this front's not connected or anything like that, and this is not connected. But this is what I'm looking at. This sleeve right here has the cut work to it. When you're close up, you can see that. But at a distance, I don't really see a big change in the effect. So I'm looking at this bottom of the dress, and what the pattern calls for is for all of those wide pieces, the bottom 3, to be cut work the same as the sleeves. But I'm not going to do that because I don't see a real difference. I think that there's a chance that that could weaken somewhat the skirt. And the fabric that I'm using, it's a fairly substantial linen, so it does have some weight to it. And I think it looks nice the way it is. So I'm going to go ahead and just skip the cut work and go to the next step. But I want you to see how that turned out. Just to let you know, that fusible thread trick worked fabulously. I think that that's really the way to go so that you don't have to worry about anything shifting on you. And these are the pockets. Let me set that in there. So you can see here's the pocket, and the inside is hidden because it's 2 different seam allowances. Plus, looking in here, you can see the understitching right there. So anyhow, I think it's coming together well. I gotta take a break for a second and let my microphone battery recharge, and I'll be back later. Alright, so I'm finally at the part where I'm going to be attaching the skirt to the bodice. So I am right now matching up my center back, and what I'm pinning it to is the bottom half of that waistband. So here's the bodice, okay? Here's that waistband midriff thing that we did earlier, and I am attaching it to the waistband, the interfaced side of this waistband. So I'm just going to match up my center back, my side seams, and my fronts, and everything else should hopefully find its place. And what we want to have happen is for this front edge just to line up exactly with everything else in the front. So once I get all of this pinned, I am going to be coming back and across the top here, sewing it straight stitch, 5/8 inch seam allowance. Got to work on that. Okay, I'll be right back. Alright, so I've got it stitched. This is the seam we just put in. Oops, sorry. This is the seam I just put in. Now this one is the one that I graded a long time ago, and it's laying nice and flat. This definitely is not. There's a lot of bulk in here. So I'm going to be grading this one also, and again from the inside out. So I'm going to be taking this part with the interfacing on it. I'm going to be taking that one the shortest, and it shall be down to just under 1/4 inch. Here's you can see the seam there, and that's how long that is. Now the part with the skirt where it's all serged together here, I am going to basically be cutting off all of the serging on the top. When I get to the back, you'll see the biggest difference, because remember I had to serge it before we did the pleats, so you can see how much extra bulk all that adds in there. So I'm going to be taking down this whole layer just below that serging, and then that's going to help it stagger, so it's not going to be as thick in that waistband. I don't want a waistband that's really chunky. I want one that's nice. Alright, so I've got this part down here graded, and I am working in sections, pressing up that seam we just did, and at the same time pulling this band down and pinning it down so that it's at the right place, so that it's just at where that stitching line is. And that way I can come back and whip stitch it down, and it's going to look really nice on the inside. So before I go to the next spot, I'm going to press it down again and just turn it. And now I'm just going to take a few minutes and hand stitch this inside facing for the waistband down. Alright, so I've got that whip stitched on, and we're going to put the dress aside for a minute, and the front placket is what I'm working on now. This is the big long strip that's going to go along each side right here that we put the buttons and buttonholes in. Now, the pattern calls for interfacing the entire piece. I'm going to interface just the one side of it. I think that's going to be enough without making it too bulky. Okay, so what I need to do first is get this interfacing onto my pieces, and then I'll come back and put all my markings on. So what I'm going to do is take the individual piece over to the ironing board and fold it in half lengthwise and iron that so I have a nice crease. Then I'm going to take my interfacing with the fusy part down and line that up with that crease, and that way I know for sure that my interfacing is only going to be on half of the placket. So here is my placket, and I have it interfaced halfway. So now that I've done that, I'm going to come back and mark my circle. I'm going to just draw in my 2 notches, and down here there is another notch, just so that when I'm pinning it onto my dress, hang on a second. Okay, just so that when I'm pinning it onto my dress, I can make sure that I have everything lined up correctly. So let me show you how I'm getting it placed. Alright, so before we get to the point where we're going to sew the placket on, I need to make sure that everything is going to be symmetrical here, because the last thing I want is to get 2 plackets sewed on and have like 1 row of lace here and 1 here, or a waistband here and something else here. It's important to me, because we've been working on 2 separate sides, to try to bring it together and just make sure there's no problems before that gets sewn on. Because once the placket is sewn on, it kind of sets it in stone where everything is placed. So let me show you what I mean. What I've done here is just matched up the front and the back, and I'm just pinning them together at certain points. I have made the very top level and put a pin there. Then there's a notch, and I have pinned them at the notch. And then at the very top and bottom of this waistband piece, if you can see, I have pinned there. Okay, so that's one, and it looks pretty good. I don't see any problems there. I think we're going to be good. The next mark is a double notch, and there's a little bit of give on this side, but not bad. You know, we can make that work too. But below that one and above the first piece of lace, one of these sides has a whole lot more ease in it than the other side. And I need to make sure that when I'm sewing that placket on, that all of this ease is going to be taken in. Now, let's see if that's the only place. So then I've matched up this row of lace. That looks good. That. All the other things, whoops, the pin on the last row of lace came off. Hang on a second. Put that back on there. Okay. And here's my problem. My last row of lace is off by an inch. That's what it is. Now, am I going to readjust all these rows of lace now? Oh my goodness, no. Not at all. But what I'm going to do right now is mark the bottom where it's too short, because I want to make sure that is where I'm going to end. I'm not too sure how I got one of these rows of lace off, but apparently I did. So I've got, that's where this came in. I have an extra inch here. All right. So I can either try to ease it in as I'm sewing it into the band and hope for the best, or I can try to come up with a way to gather it beforehand. And I think that is what I'm going to do, because that way I can double check it before I pin the placket on it to make sure. So I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and at about 1/4 inch, I'm going to do my little easing trick, and I'll show you what I mean. All right, so I'm basically going to be using the same technique that I do for the top of sleeve caps when I'm easing them in. And it's a straight stitch. It's a fairly long straight stitch that I'm using. And as I'm running it, I'm going to be putting this finger at the back of the presser foot and just pushing it up, down, and up against the back of the presser foot. I'm going to do that the entire length from the bottom of the waistband all the way to the first row of stitching. All right, so at this point I have very carefully pinned the band on, and while I've been doing that, I've been clipping it as I go just to make sure everything stays the same. And I think I'm good. I think that everything is going to match up well. I have the same amount extra at the bottom, and it looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my little clips off, and I have them pinned individually that way, and go ahead and sew it 5/8 as usual down each side. All right, so this is my placket, and I've just roughly turned it right side out and pinned it a couple times just so I could get a look at it. And so here's my top, nice and even. My waistband matching, where I had to do some easing, it's invisible. And the lace pieces are going to line up, and the bottom is lining up. So I'm happy with that now. I don't know how it got off, but you know what? We can fix just about anything. Okay, so welcome to day 3 of this project. Now, I wanted to just explain a couple little things. The process that the pattern lines out is that before you put the placket on, you hem the bottom, okay? Now, I think you can understand, based on everything last night, of why I wanted to make sure that my placket was on right and lined up and everything before I did the hemming. Because if I just went straight to the hemming and there's anything that's wonky at that point, it'll be really obvious, because that hem where it matches in the front wouldn't be right. So now that I have that taken care of, I actually am going to have to pick out the stitches, and I'm just going to pick them out up to this lace, and that's going to give me enough space to be able to hem the dress part. We're not hemming this, we're just hemming the dress part, okay? So I'll pick out the stitches up to the lace, and I'm going to be hemming it using stretch lace, you know, my favorite. This particular stretch lace I got out of the pack, Love from, can we focus here? There we go. Stretch lace, isn't that cute packaging? But this is what got me. There you go. Do you see that little price tag? Nickels, 88 cents. Sometimes I just acquire a lot of things. You know, if you're the sewing person in your family, you know what I mean. The sewing things just come to you. And Nickels is a little department store that's in my mother's family's hometown in Louisiana. So I just thought that was really cool, you know, that I can trace this particular package back to probably an aunt or great-grandmother or somebody who was out shopping, you know, probably 70s, early 80s or something, and buying some stretch lace. So I thought that was cool. Anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and pick this out, and then I'll show you how I apply my lace. Okay, so there is a curve to the bottom edge of this skirt, and that's one of the things that stretch lace will help us deal with when we hem. It's going to help ease in some of that fullness so we can have a nice flat hem. So how I'm going to apply this is the wide version. There's a narrow and a wide version of stretch lace. And I'm going to lay it out so that with just the serged edge underneath, and sew it on so that about 1/2 inch of it is tucked up underneath here. And I'm going to be sewing it on from the right side. So basically what you do when you have a curved hem is just put a slight amount of stretch into it as you go. And then what that does is when you're ready to flip it up and hem it, it's going to put a little bit of ease in there so that when you flip it over, you don't have to worry about trying to fit anything in, and there's no puckers and things like that. So with the stretch lace, there's when there's tracks on the sides, those are the sides that you sew in. A straight stitch right down this track here. And again, I'm setting it in so that the fabric underneath comes up to right about there. Okay, so this is my lace sewn onto my bottom of my skirt fabric. Now, I want a big wide hem on here, so I want to show you how I'm going to be doing this. You can see that when I just fold it over, it's easing in any extra fullness so that it's going to lay nice and flat. Now right here, maybe you can see it better right here, is the seam. It's the stitching for the bottom of this lace. It's sewn on like right here. I left the scallops free, but there's a line of stitching here. I'm actually going to be matching up the bottom or the stitching line of my stretch lace to that line. And by doing that, I should be able to come back out and just sew the thing on my machine with a white thread, and it will blend into the lace on the front. So I'm just going to be very carefully putting it up to that right level and pressing it. As soon as my iron heats up, I was able just to sew straight in here, and I think that those stitches are pretty camouflaged into the lace, and it gives a nice wide but very sturdy hem, so I'm happy with that. Alrighty, so I got my hem sewed in. I think it looks nice, and then afterwards I came back and I restitched that part that I had picked out, so I'm ready to go ahead and do my placket casing. What I'm going to be doing is grading this because there's a lot of thickness in here, again, that I don't want where my buttonholes are going to be. I'm going to be cutting out the bulk here. So the first is this lining. I'm going to go ahead and actually trim some of this. Okay, So the piece with the interfacing, I'm going to be cutting that closer. I got like a fat 1/8 of an inch there. And then the piece that has the garment fabric, I'm going to take that out a little bit further. Okay, so I have 2 different layers there. And that way, when this is folded out, it's going to be a lot nicer and smoother, because we're also going to be having a 5/8 inch layer here on the back. So that way it'll be a 1/8, like 3/8 and a 5/8. So it'll be nice and graded out. Now, of course, this is too long. I'm going to be cutting that. But what I'm going to be doing is folding it up and fold it back down at this edge where I know my center is, because that's where my interfacing ends. Okay. And then folding the raw edge back up, and it should be up at about a 5/8 inch seam allowance there too, just to make everything even. Okay. So now this is what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and stick a pin right there. And now that it's all folded up and I know where I'm going to need to stitch, I'm going to trim off this bottom right here, because I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to be stitching straight across, like level with the bottom of this hem. Just bring it straight across. I think my pin's running out. Straight across like that, all right? And do that on both sides of the bottom, and something very similar up on top. All right, so I have my little seam in there, and I've clipped at an angle my edges just to try to take some bulk out. So now I'm going to flip it, and that's going to encase it down here and give me a really nice edge that's going to match up with my hem. And it's going to work the same for the top. So at this point, what I'm going to do is, actually, before I even get started with this, I'm going to go to my ironing board and press this seam allowance towards the band, just so it'll lay nice and flat. After that, what I'll do is come back, make sure my fold is where it should be. Excuse that piece. Tuck it up underneath, and it should be about 5/8 of an inch, and pin it right at that stitching line where everything else is. Okay, and so once I have it all pinned down, then I can come back and stitch it in place. All right, so if you can see, what I've done is I've pinned this edge and turned it under so that it comes right up to where that stitching line is. Before I actually sew it, I'm going to go to my ironing board and press it from this side, so that I can make sure as I press it, it's staying where it's supposed to be. I have all of my pin heads sticking out, because when I sew it, I'm actually going to be looking at it from this side, okay? And that way I'll be able to pull out my pins as I go. And what I'm going to be doing first is coming up and basically like a top stitch that's going to catch that bottom, and that's why I wanted to make sure that it's placed properly when I iron it. But I'm going to come up about 1/8 of an inch in on this side, and if it looks like it at that point that I should, I'll also come up on this side. So I'll have possibly a double row of stitching, but for sure at least one. And by grading all of those seams that we did earlier, it's making it a lot nicer. I can feel right now that that really thick bulk that could really give us problems when you're making buttonholes and things just is not there. So I'm really happy about that. So this is how it looks. I have my row of stitching here, and it's catching back here, so I'm happy with that. So now what I'm going to be doing is drawing some lines to get me started marking my buttonholes. Now they have it laid out so all the buttonholes are going up and down, which is good. And so what I'm going to be doing is just drawing a line that's along the track that I want all my buttonholes to lay on. And again, I'm using my heat erasable pen, so all this will disappear. But that way I have like a standardized line that I can follow as I'm placing them. Alright, so I've picked the buttons I'm going to use. They're just these vintagey looking shirt buttons here from my collection. And they're about 1/2 inch, and it looks like the Patterns buttonhole guide is using 5/8 inch buttonhole, so that should fit. So I'm just going to actually transfer it over. Now what I'm doing is I'm lining it up so that this top dot is at my top edge, and lining up, I folded this guide on the center line where the buttonholes are going to go, and I'm just lining that up here, and I'm going to make some little dashes where they have their stop and start on those buttonholes. Now, it's usually a very good idea to make sure you have a button at your waist and at the fullest point in your bust. And it looks like they tried to line that up for me, so I'm going to trust their judgment. If it looks like there's some gapping or something later, I can always come back and inside of here sew a snap or something just to tack it in that, you know, no one's going to see but me. So I will be using my button holder on my treadle sewing machine. I'm not going to show you that because I've done it so much in the past, but if you're interested on that button holder, I have a separate video for that you can see. But once I get all of these buttonholes on here, then we will come back and place the buttons, and then that's going to be it. It will be done, so I'm really excited. Alright, so I have ironed my placket so all my marks disappeared, which is very satisfying. And you can see I got my lovely little rounded edged buttonholes right down the center. So I am clipping the threads from them because I just kind of do them in sequence. Do one, move down, do another, move down. And I'm going to cut these open with a little chisel and sew the buttons on with my button thread. And this is it. It's this 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 stuff. It's basically a strong thread that has a fusible stuff on it. So after you sew your button, if you touch the back of it with your iron, it'll just kind of glue all those little buttons, threads together so that there's no chance that it's going to come off. So I'm just going to show, I'm using actually the side of the piece of wood I use as a clapper. I'm using it because I have to have something strong. It's not going to get damaged behind my chisel when I push it. Now after I cut it, I kind of fiddle around inside there and pull out any loose threads that might bother me and clip those off with some sharp scissors, and then it's ready to go. So I'm going to finish these up. Okay, I want to let you know I did that Scotch tape button placement hack thing on this, and for some reason it did not work. Why is my hair like that? Okay, and for some reason it did not work. A lot of the buttons ended up being shifted down either an 1/8 or a 1/4 inch too low. So I would recommend on this, especially because of all of the places that have to meet the waistband, the lace marks, everything else, I would just recommend going old school matching up method of placing the side of the buttonholes on top of the other side. Well, here, I'll just show you. I would lay the placket just straight over on top and make sure that everything in your fabric is where you want it. Come through and in the center of your buttonhole with a erasable pen, of course, just do a sideways line. And that way you're going to have a for sure mark of where is the appropriate place for that buttonhole. Because using that other method, I had some way off center for some reason. Anyhow, just thought I would give you that update. it's finally finished. I think it's pretty. But man, that is a lot of work. I was excited about this pattern. You know, the old Gunne Sax type thing was always a favorite of mine. This isn't exactly Gunne Sax though. If you can tell, with all of the pleats, instead of big ruffles everywhere, it's like a tailored version. With the big long sewn in pleats, it's not really full. You actually get a really nice flattering silhouette. But with that, just letting you know, there is not a lot of ease built into this pattern. So when you're cutting out, you know how some patterns have like an extra 3 or 4 inches in random places just for fun? This one doesn't have all of that. There's some ease built in, but not a ton. So when you're choosing your sizing and cutting it out, just be aware and, you know, measure and things like that. I really didn't go too far from the original pattern. I did do my own thing around this neckline. If I had not already graded all of these seams, sorry, my cat. If I had not already graded all of these seams and everything around my neckline, I probably would have flipped it so that it would match, because the original pattern had, instead of the facing on the inside, it was on the outside and tucked in to look like a band. I end up with the, you know, the same size neck opening and everything. It just looks slightly different than the pattern, but I think it's fine. Using the fusible thread in the bobbin and then using that to place all of the lace onto the skirt was a big help. Sometimes even just pinning lace on, you get a little bit of fudge factor built in. And so by being able to just lay it all out and 100% very smoothly, just ironing it, but without all the gunk that like using stitch witchery or something like that would have seeping through. It's very nice. It's a very nice thing. I think that a spool of that fusible thread usually costs like about $11, but you know, if you can use a coupon or whatever, that's a way to go. Other than that, the biggest pain on this dress, besides, you know, dealing with lace, which is always, you love it or hate it, is the whole concept of getting everything to match up perfectly in the front. Because everything is so tailored with the straight pleats and everything, you really want to make sure that that front opening is nice and flat, and that the lace lines up exactly right, that the hem lines up right. And then after all that, I had some struggles with placing my buttons. I had done that Scotch tape hack where you just set it down. It did not work on this dress. I got done. It looked like it was going to. When I put the two sides together, it looked like it was going to, so I just went for it and sewed them all on. They were all off. I had to take off all but one button and move them, but I did it, and now I think it works out fine. So just be aware. That was the biggest struggle for me, where I had to be really careful when I was lining things up, is to make sure that everything coming down that center front was going to match. Other than that, I really like it. I think the linen that I used goes well with the dress. And I think using the cotton lace was nice too. So, you know, all in all, I think it was good. Am I going to do it again? Not right now. Honestly, it was a whole lot of work, but I think it's pretty. I'm going to hang on to the pattern, and if I really get the urge to, I will. But once is enough for me for right now. So, but if you enjoy this type of dress and you have time, it takes a lot of time because there's so many little pieces. But if you enjoy it and that type of sewing is therapeutic for you, I would encourage you to try it because I enjoyed it. All right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.